Hey folks, do you actually want to talk about some of the craziest kind of batshit public history stuff that I've seen in a while that actually fits in with the kind of stuff that we talk about all the time? Want to know why the Patriot Myth matters? Want to know how it actually impacts your life? Let's take a look at this, which dropped from the New York Times today. How our so called founding fathers would react to today's digital chaos, TikTok, and online porn. Can't make this stuff up, right? So, yes, talk about what Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and James Madison thought about porn. Because justices on the Supreme Court are, really, can't make this stuff up. This garbage is in law review articles and briefs to the Supreme Court dealing with two cases that are coming up before them, obviously one of which folks on TikTok are very concerned with on January 10th. Hey folks, I'm Tad Sturmer. I teach public history at Johns Hopkins. I'm a scholar of the American Revolution. I am losing what is left of my hair tearing it out over this kind of stuff. And I went to law school at Tulane University in New Orleans, something that I don't talk a lot about, but nevertheless is true. And when I went to law school in the 1990s, originalism was so irrelevant to our education about con law that we talked about it once in the fall of 1994 when Antonin Scalia visited us to talk to us about it. We didn't cover it before then. We didn't cover it after. And Tulane's pretty good school. Just saying. But today, originalism governs more and more of the interpretation of the Constitution because originalists represent a majority on the Supreme Court and many judges in lower federal courts, so many of which were appointed during the first Trump administration, but they were there well before then. They are stuck in the 18th century, engaging in this ridiculous intellectual cosplay that clings to these outdated, irrelevant standards of the founders when tackling free speech issues they could never have conceived of. It's the reverse of presentism that kind of gets hurled at people like me all the time, twisting what they cherry pick from the 18th century into an interpretive pretzel. So that it can magically fit whatever goals they already have in mind that they want to achieve through, talk about judicial activism. So the battle ends up being over, and this is the worst kind of battle to have in terms of this kind of context. Whose side Thomas Jefferson is on? What James Madison quote you're going to use? Which founder is on your side? Pretending that it matters. But it does. And why? Well, it's all about the Patriot Myth, what we talk about all the time when I'm working on several projects about this idea that our founders were these flawless, divine, and divinely inspired beings whose words are untouchable. They are sacred. Their parchments were scripture. And this myth keeps a narrow group of radical enslavers' legacies alive. I mean, they're like the most evil of ghosts. This is like the worst kind of Christmas carol, right? These folks continue from beyond the grave to govern your life, to maintain a system where liberty is reserved for the few and exclusion is the norm. Their words, they matter more than yours. Why? Because they were special. But how special were they? This is part of what we do in terms of our deconstruction of the Patriot Myth, which filters so much into American identity of a particular sort. We can just look at a couple of things, right? I mean, the original Constitution was considered so incomplete that it wouldn't pass without the addition of 10 extra amendments. The Bill of Rights, almost more than a third of all the amendments that have since been added to it. It wouldn't pass without the addition of 10 amendments pushed on it mostly by its opponents, the Anti-Federalists, because the founders in Philadelphia didn't think they were necessary. Enslaved people, 20% of the population, designated as 3/5 of a person, but solely for the purpose of assigning political power to white people, and thereby ensuring that slavery would never end. And so it took a civil war to start undoing that. And there are other things. There are things like the senators who Madison and his gang thought should never be elected by the people, but appointed by state legislatures. And that didn't get fixed until just over 100 years ago, until the early 20th century. And do we really need to talk about the Electoral College? The founders didn't have all the answers. In fact, they had so few lasting answers that no other country on earth that cares about freedom and democracy has adopted the form of government that they created. Not one has adopted the American system. Every other democracy in the world has adopted a version of the British form of parliamentary democracy. Even, and maybe especially in terms of a case study, those countries that emerged from World War II and the collapse of the Soviet Union, knowing that they were in need of the strongest possible guarantees of liberty and self-government. Who won the American Revolution? Maybe it's the British system of government. So the founders not only created a government that Americans have needed to fundamentally alter more than a dozen times, substantively, and in ways that cost hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of lives, from the men and women who risked the Underground Railroad to Canada. That provided liberty, right? To Nat Turner and his followers trying to push for liberty at home, to those who died in bloody Kansas, to other followers of John Brown and his call to arms in 1859, to the Civil War, to the collapse of Reconstruction, into Jim Crow and an era of lynching as normal. And we haven't yet talked about the genocide against indigenous peoples who were not given citizenship on their own land until the 1920s. Do we need to go into exploitation and brutalization of both Chinese and Japanese Americans? And, of course, commercial imperialization against the Hawaiian people. Yet, we're supposed to believe that the framers were so star-spangled great that their words can continue to govern ours from beyond the grave. Because originalists are hell-bent on treating their 18th century views, not even represented for their time, as eternal truths, ignoring how society and governance has evolved. No other democracy today is stuck in the past like this. Other countries actually move forward and progress with inclusive and representative systems of government. Crazy, huh? But we can't do that. No. Because the Patriot Myth glorifies America as uniquely exceptional because of its founders. And this is where you always end up with these people. Divine inspiration. God said so. God made them special. Therefore, God made the country they created special. Not just special, but unique in world history. Not just unique for their time, unique for all time. Inspirational and unmatched. That mindset keeps our country frozen in 1789. And so by worshiping the founders and treating whatever they say as ex cathedra pronouncements, we allow these outdated and unjust systems to persist, which is why dismantling the Patriot Myth is essential to reclaiming our country, making it truly ours, truly yours, and actually advancing into the 21st century with a governance system that reflects our values, our needs. And so for those who are interested in a nice kind of potted explanation of the roots of originalism, check out Michael Hattem's The Memory of 76, The Revolution in American History. It's a terrific book, which has a concise explanation of originalism and its origins in the 1970s and 1980s. I ordered it through my local bookstore, 8 Cousins in Falmouth. Always support your local bookstores and your local libraries, because it is time to finally bury the founders, not resurrect them. And we need to make sure they stay in their graves. These folks are like vampires.